Earth School. Why am I being punished for this? What kind of lesson is this? Oh, yeah, I went right down the rabbit hole of that. It's like any loss, grief. It's like I went through all the phases. At first, it was a little bit of denial. And then it was like, I am so angry at God. And you go through okay, well, I'm trying to live in forgiveness and be positive and all that stuff. And just deep grief. I mean, I went through deep grief for the life that I knew I would never have again. You go through all of that and you hit literally rock bottom.
Hey everyone, let's start healing. I'm Adrienne Murchison. Shiloh says hi. And welcome to episode 114 of the Let's Start Healing podcast. We have more in common than we think, and what we have in common can change the world. Well, my conversation today is the conversation that I love to have. It is about healing the body, the mind, the spirit, coming through a really difficult time and connecting with God, our higher power, and getting through that really rough journey. My guest today is Kathy Harmon-Luber. Before I tell you about her, I want to invite you to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on. Please like the episode, share Let's Start Healing with at least one person. Shiloh seconds that notion. And let me know what you think about the episode. Email me at let's start healing podcast at gmail.com. And this is just, as I said, this is the kind of conversation that I love to have. This is truly about healing. Kathy is an author and she's also a healer. She's a Reiki practitioner. She's a practitioner of sound therapy. And she wrote a book that is about her story coming through a physical ailment that is major. She has several different types of spinal diseases, she's told me, and they are inoperable. And she was bedridden for several years, and she will tell us all about it and how she came through it and how she is now up and walking. Her book is titled Suffering to Thriving, Your Toolkit for Navigating Your Healing Journey and how to live a more peaceful, healthy life. And it is such a good conversation because we all go through difficult times. In this conversation, we are talking about her back and just being down and out and in the bed for many years. That is really something. And the back is so significant to me. We get into, she and I, a little bit about how our emotions can be tied to our medical conditions. And the back is known to be a symbol of support. And oftentimes, for many people, if we don't feel support in our lives, or if people don't feel support in their lives, we can have back pain, debilitating back pain. And there's just so much around the back. If the back's not working, it's a problem. It is a problem. And as I say, we get into that. And coming through the kind of journey that she has been through, it is about more than a physical ailment, because all of us, I know you who are watching and listening, I'm sure that you have been through your own trials. I mean, haven't you been through loss? Haven't you been through an unexpected tragedy, a sudden tragedy, grief? I have a close girlfriend who is on the end of her healing journey through cancer. She is I pray, almost recovered from this year-long journey. And when she started out this journey a year ago, she was determined that she was going to stay positive and that she was going to keep all the negativity. Anybody who wanted to bring some negative energy to her, she was just going to check that and keep that away from her. And she has been pretty successful, incredibly successful about doing this. But of course, she has been through a very, very difficult time. She's been through incredible pain, loss, surgery, chemotherapy. Just, it is amazing. And I know that there's so many uh, out here in this world we're in. So many of you have been through your own journey through illness and cancer, or you have a loved one who's come through an illness, or perhaps they didn't. And it's about trying to get through that. I'm talking to you now on the day before the anniversary of my mom passing. And so this day before always is impactful to me also because it was her last full day of life. And I remember, first of all, I can't believe how many years it's been, but also I think about just the aftermath and trying to get through that. And just during the time of making the arrangements for her services and thinking how I was in such pain. I was in such emotional pain. I was hurting so badly that I thought I could never be there for someone going through this. I really thought that, like, oh my God, I cannot revisit this pain and be there for someone else. And I really, really feel it's important to be there for someone who's been there for me. I remember thinking, oh my God, if I have a friend who loses their mother, I don't know how I'm going to be there for them. But we heal and we get through it with determination. And thank God, I have been able to be there for friends in need. But the point I'm trying to make is when I'm grieving someone, whether it's my parents or my brothers, it always gives me this sense, this feeling that I'm walking up, not even walking, that I'm climbing a mountain. And I'm in such pain, and it's just so hard to just climb this mountain. That's what it feels like as I'm trying to just move through an hour or a day when I'm really dealing with a big loss. And so to think about Kathy and the physical pain that she was in and the low points emotionally that she must have been feeling, just being in that space for years, and finding her way through it is really amazing, really amazing. Well, let's meet her and let her tell you more of her story and her experience. Let's get started and let's start healing. Welcome, Kathy.
Hi, Adrienne. Thanks for having me.
This is a real treat, and I'm really excited for my listeners to learn about you and what you practice. And you have a book, Suffering to Thriving. Just share about that for me.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I've been on a healing journey since I was in my early 20s. I was super active, was into running and hiking and all the stuff, swimming, everything, dance, just super active. I began to have back issues. And when I went to chiropractors and then orthopedic surgeons, they said, "You have the spine of an 80-year-old woman." And I was like, oh my gosh,
And how old were you at that time?
21. Yeah. So
Okay.
pretty crazy, right? So one doctor even went so far as to say to me, "You're going to be in a wheelchair by the time you're in your mid 30s." And I was horrified by that, first that they would say something like that. But my first just sort of instinct was, I don't want to own that. I'm going to do everything I can to not end up in a wheelchair. And I'm happy to say I'm much older now, decades later, and I'm not, thankfully. But I chalk that up to just having actual faith that I was not going to own that story. I wanted to write a different story. And so the challenges started then. When I hit my 40s, discs started rupturing. It ends up that I have like 7 hereditary spinal diseases that
Yes.
combined the way they are together make what is happening with my spine inoperable. So the discs started rupturing. I was at the gym with a personal trainer, the first one. It ruptured, it took me about 3 months or so. I was working, I was executive director of a small foundation in LA that helps people with developmental disabilities, loved my job, wanted to get back at it. I did. A couple more discs ruptured, same story, couple of months. I'm back to work and everything is
And
fine.
what does that mean, rupture? Like they
Oh, yeah.
broke apart, or what happens when they rupture?
Thank you. Okay, so the discs, if you can imagine between your vertebrae, little like jelly filled donuts almost, and they cushion the vertebrae of your back. And so if one of the spinal diseases causes compression, and so they get squeezed narrower and narrower and narrower, and if you
Yeah.
move a wrong way, you're doing an exercise or something, they can rupture, and then the jelly inside, that is the shock absorber, if you will, is toxic. It's toxic to the surrounding everything. So in 2016, the 4th disc ruptured, and this one was super bad. That jelly substance glommed
Yeah.
onto my sciatic nerve, and I was bedridden for years. 5 years, and I'm great today. I've come through it, and that's why the book is called Suffering to Thriving, because I really am thriving. There are things I will never do again, like gymnastics or skiing or, but I live a pretty normal life. I even dance a little. But the point is, I was given this sort of a really grim news, and I decided I just didn't want to live that story. I just began doing everything I could by way of alternative. I don't want to say alternative. I want to say complementary, because everything I did was hand in hand with my Western doctors. But everything from acupuncture, supplements, physical therapy, big time, and then just coming up with adaptive ways of doing things. This is after 2 or 3 intense years of just being completely bedridden and not being able to have much of a life. After that, beginning to find good ways to live a normal life and not going down the path of the wrong questions. What if it's always going to be like this? What if I'll be paralyzed and won't be able to walk? What if I do end up in a wheelchair? When you're flat on your back, it's much like anything that we go through, a divorce, a bad breakup, loss and grief, they all become these portals, I think, through which we can look at our lives and say, is there a better way of doing my life, frankly?
This last time happened in 2016, right?
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
you were bedridden 2 to 3 years, and then you started having physical therapy and acupuncture and things like that?
Yeah, exactly. And then I
And
began being more mobile, being able to walk, being able to get to the kitchen and stand in the kitchen and cook. So little by little, setting goals and having the belief that I actually could achieve them. That's the hard part. That's the part that I call your mind is your medicine. You
yeah,
know?
because I'm thinking about the day to day. I imagine you were in pain.
Oh, lots.
And
Yeah.
so just what was that like emotionally? And I understand that you overcame what you might have been feeling emotionally, that you let your mind go into a strong place. But were there times that you were down, and not 1 year, not 2 years, but 3 years? What was that
Exactly.
like?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it, making it sound like, yes, I'm thriving, everything's great, because those first 3 years, the first year, the first full year was horrible. It was just so horrible, because to be an active person as we are, I had
Yes.
a job. I played classical flute, every weekend in my local town. I was an award winning artist and photographer. all of that stopped, all of it. So you can
Yeah.
imagine, like, okay, so I knew in my mind that when these things happen, before it'd be 2 or 3 months, I thought, okay, I'm down for the count for 3 months, let's say. This was way worse than the other ones. But I thought, okay, 3 months. 3 months came and I could barely walk to the bedroom door. Like, that's how bad it was. And my
Okay.
husband is an angel. My friends are angels. They took care of grocery shopping and bringing meals and the whole thing. I mean, it was really intense. And I thought for a long time it would just be better after a short time, but after month 3, month 4, month 5, I was really depressed. I went in and I have, clinical depression. I went into a depression. I got help. Therapy is, and I just want to say to any of your listeners who are going through a really rough time, whether it's health or otherwise, it is not a weakness to ask for help. And
Yeah.
whether that's the help of your friends listening or getting help from a therapist or
Yeah.
psychiatrist, you have to do it. It's just amazing what therapy can do. And I've been in and out of therapy my whole life. So I knew at that point that was something I had to do. But then I started doing something. I've always been a journal keeper, Adrienne. From the time when I was a little girl. And so I couldn't physically sit up in bed to write in my journal, but I could put my laptop on my lap and, I was still working doing grant writing on good days. And so what I started doing was just keeping a journal. And at first I was like, day 1, day 2, day 100, day
Yeah.
150. And my husband one day said to me, "Why are you counting the bad days? Stop focusing on how long it's been. Just focus in the present." Like, duh, of course, I'm very much into living in the present moment. But somehow a disruption, health wise or otherwise, another crisis in
Yes,
your life, as you know, it just totally knocks us off center sometimes. And it did.
definitely.
And, I'm somebody who meditates daily. I read, Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, all of the uplifting things. And I started saying to myself, okay, as part of this journal, every day I'm going to Google search and find an inspiring quote that's going to get me through this. And my
Right.
book is actually peppered with some of those very quotes that I used to help me keep my spirits up and to try to hold on to hope, to be positive, to listen to my intuition about what I needed for self-care, right? Before then, self-care was, maybe taking a bubble bath, going for a long walk,
Right.
having a glass of wine, going to a spa, something like that. When something extreme happens, and again, it doesn't have to be your health. The question to ask is, what can I do for myself today that my future self will thank me for? And it's
I
probably
love
not
that.
endlessly, yeah, it's probably not endlessly, scrolling our apps. It's probably not just going down the negative rabbit hole that gets me through this day being positive, not false positivity and saying, "Oh, everything's going to be fine," because I knew it wasn't. After month
Yeah.
3, I knew things were not going to be fine. And I saw a neurosurgeon again, and he says, "You can't even start physical therapy for a year." And that had never happened to me before. So it was real easy to go to that dark place.
What was the shift that you were able to get out of the bed sometimes?
Yeah. I think the doctors recognized that up until maybe over a year into this, any physical therapy would do more harm than good. And
Mhm.
so I didn't do anything like that. And they said, if it's causing more pain, you are making things worse, actually, because it's very different from what we learn. I've always gone to a gym, always, worked out. It's like no pain, no gain.
Right.
The opposite is true with what I have. And so I would set goals for myself and say, okay, today I'm going to walk 30 steps. That's it, 30 steps. 30 steps is my goal. And some days I couldn't do that. And that was
Yeah.
devastating, as you can imagine.
But
And
then
so,
when you could.
yeah, but that's where the magic was. It was like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do 35 or next week or next month. I didn't know. I just said, okay, keep trying to reach for something that isn't hurting you. but that gives you hope that one day, then the happy day came when I could walk 500 steps. And I am a person who has always had a gratitude practice, right? And the things that I just never thought to be grateful for before this happened was I can walk more than 25 steps. Woo.
Yes.
We don't think of those things. I can stand in the kitchen and cook dinner. It is transformative. Like
Yeah.
the pain was so bad. I wasn't just in bed because I was supposed to rest. I was in bed because it was physically so painful to move. I would curl myself in the shape of like a crescent moon, if you can imagine, like with my head and my feet over on one side and my back went out to the side.
Yes.
The pressure, and I was still in pain, and I was on a whole cocktail of anti-inflammatories and pain meds and things to help me sleep, and it was off the charts. In fact, in the first few months, I would sleep for maybe 20 minutes. And I still have pain. It's nothing like what it was before. And you do think about, like, I can't live my life in this much pain if this is what it's always going to be. The pain makes any depression or anxiety or anything that we have so much worse. But what I want to say to your listeners, if you're in that kind of pain or you're going through that right now, it's like the most important thing is to hold on to hope. Pain medicine is rapidly evolving right now. And there are so many complementary things besides taking meds that people can do. And there's just a lot of new research out there right now. That was what kept me from completely just losing hope and saying, I don't want to live if my life is going to be like this.
Do you associate body and illnesses that we might have with emotions? Like the back is associated with support. I definitely associate it with support for myself. And I have a friend who's also a Reiki practitioner. She associates it with support. If she doesn't feel support, she does have like really severe back pain. Is that
Yeah.
something that you felt personally and you associated with this?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, I really do believe that there is that mind-body
I
connection,
do
and
too. I do
right?
too.
Yeah. And a lot of people have, written about this. I'm thinking Deepak Chopra and Dr. Gabor Mate.
And Louise Hay, very much so. Heal thy body.
I think yeah, that's the
Mhm.
one who ever wrote something, about the back and lack of support that really resonated with me. And I was like, there's something to this. And Dr. Gabor Mate's book, When the Body Says No, that really resonated with me with all of the back issues. I was taking on clients and work that I didn't necessarily want to take on at the time. And I did it because I thought it would be good for my business or whatever financially. And my body said no. And my body kept saying no. And this is the interesting thing. The year 2016, when that disc ruptured, I had so many warnings from my body. Whether I was taking photographs at a friend's wedding, my husband and I went up to Oregon and did a road trip, fun stuff. But my body kept saying, you really shouldn't be doing this. I did. I went on a client trip in December, and it was the very next day. This was an out of town trip, involved a couple nights overnight stay and a long drive back. And I knew I should not have been doing that. And I did. I did it. I knew it was a brand new client. It was early December, and I thought, well, can't wait any longer. We'll be in the new year. And so I did it. And my body said no. And it was lack of support. I needed more support in my life. Here's a different twist on that. I needed to be more supportive of my own self care.
Yeah, right. That's a big one.
It's a huge one. Okay, yeah, the holidays are coming up. I'll rest over the holidays. That is not self care. That's what I was doing. That was not self care. Self care is, getting quiet, tapping into your intuition, what I call our inner healer, and saying, what do I need right now? I don't need to work 10 hours straight. I need a day off, or I need an hour off, or I need 10 minutes every hour to just reset. Whatever that happens to be, it's different for every person. So that was something I knew going into this, but I wasn't doing. I wasn't paying attention to my intuition.
Right.
You always hear this, I should have followed my heart. I should have followed my gut instinct, right?
How was the pandemic for you? I mean, was it not as bad because you had been through this, or what was that experience like?
Oh, what a good question. Yeah, I would say just as the pandemic was coming on, I was able to get up and around and do stuff. And then, that lasted a couple months and it was like, wham, here's the pandemic. And it was like, oh no. But I think what the spinal issues taught me was that I got to a point after years of just being able to be okay with this. It is that acceptance thing. This is what it is, and it's out of my power. And I either can fight it or I can accept it and say, not acceptance isn't giving up, but it is saying, okay, this is
Yes.
out of my hands, and I
Yeah.
just have to be at peace with that. So
Right.
you work that muscle during being bedridden. Now I'm up and around and doing stuff, and the pandemic hits, and it's like, oh, here we go again. you know, different issue, but it was kind of the same thing. I needed to just say, this is what it is. The whole
Mhm.
world is going through this. A lot of people were fighting it, and I was like, "You know what? I can't fight this." You flow with the river or you swim upstream and burn yourself out, right? So, I had learned this was the important thing. I learned how to work, I was doing things like Zoom, virtual stuff when the disc ruptured in order to meet my clients and stuff. So, I already had that in place. So, for a lot of people I know, switching to that in business was really hard
Right.
and working from home, but I was doing that anyway. So it's a really good question that you asked. For me, the pandemic, we lost a lot of people. That was the horrible part of it. But the how did I survive it? Yeah, that actually was not horrible. It was not
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah. And when did you write your book?
Yeah, I wrote my book. It actually launched in May of last year, and
Mhm.
it took me a couple of years. I remember that journal I was talking about. I was writing every single day about what I was going through, how I was improving, what workarounds could I use. Like, okay, I couldn't play classical flute anymore, but I had Native American flute, so I had my husband grab my Native American flute, and that's what I did for music. And instead of, being able to play my guitar, I played frame drum, which I could just put on my lap and play. And so I started just finding these ways. And when I go back and look over the week, okay, how did I improve? What is better? What goals did I hit? What goals did I miss? I was able to kind of course correct, for lack of a better word, and say, okay, this is really lighting me up right now. The music part of it and the writing part of it. And then after a while, like this was only a couple of years ago, I looked back at the journal and said, it would be a shame to waste these beautiful quotes and what I learned and put into practice as a toolkit. So the book is a toolkit. It's a lot of chapters, but really, really short. Each one is a tool for getting through.
Mhm.
And I thought, why not write this to help other people? And that is what it's doing. I think this, Adrian, it's like what occurred to me at some point. This was not at the beginning, of course, but at some point where I was able to take an aerial view of what I was going through, I was able to see that my healing journey is embedded in my life's journey. Everybody goes through something if we're lucky to live long enough, and it could be physical or mental or spiritual. But if we're lucky to live long enough, you're going to have a healing journey, which is part of your soul's journey. And
Yeah.
sometimes these disruptions, these crises in our lives open a window to, like, what is your life purpose? And I write about that in my book. It's like that led me to purpose. It led me away from the life that I was living, which at the time I considered the life of my dreams. I had
Mhm.
great clients, a great job, I was very active in our local art alliance and on the music scene. And I was on boards of nonprofit organizations. And my consulting work is helping nonprofits that help, homeless youth and solving food insecurity and just really good stuff. But there was a bigger purpose to what I was going through. And I think that is this sharing.
There's that something inside of us that is calling us to do something higher,
Yes.
maybe, than what we're doing. That really is our purpose and our passion that we may not be paying attention to. And at
Yes.
some point, it's all just going to meet and something can happen because we haven't been paying attention to it.
Yes,
And
exactly. I love that.
yeah,
And I do believe that. I think it is a portal to purpose and for many people. And I would go a step further and say that like everything on our planet right now, right? Like there is just so much going on. We are living through
absolutely.
really turbulent times on the earth level, climate change to people's lives, to wars, to injustices, the whole thing, and just how people are struggling right now. Everybody has a story to tell. There's been huge grief and loss through
Yes,
all of this. And so we are alive at this time for a reason. I do believe that. It's like we are not here by accident at this time. We have a higher purpose, a higher calling. Um, God, Goddess, source, higher power, call it what you will, but we all have a higher purpose. And I believe that, yes, we are on this earth to love, you know, as I heard you say on a previous podcast, God is love. Yes. And we are vessels of love.
that's what I believe. I believe we're here to give to each
Yes,
other, to be of service,
exactly. Yes.
and
And
we are love. So we are called to express that love.
I mean, that has just motivated me through my whole career of working with nonprofits. I want to be of service. There are many ways to be of service. Your podcast is a huge service, but everybody has a gift. And we come to this earth life, earth school, if you will, we have to realize what our gifts are. Some people recognize that very young and they do that their entire lives. I don't think that happens for most of us. We have our lives, our careers or families or whatever, and then something happens and it pushes us in a different direction that we might have a gift for. So
Exactly.
I do believe that everyone alive on the planet right now has a gift to bring forward. And the greatest thing that we could do is realize what that gift is and then bring it to the world.
Absolutely. And so I would love to talk about your sound healing and your practice as a Reiki healer and incorporate that with your relationship with God. And sound healing is just amazing. I find sound can be really healing. I know you're a musician, and is that how you were sort of gravitated to sound healing? And what type of healing do you do? A sound healing do you do?
Oh, good. I love all these questions. Yay. And I'm thrilled to hear you say that you love sound because it is an amazing thing. And I think unless you've experienced it, you can hear people talk about it, but when you experience it, it is so amazing. As a musician, I started playing, music really young. My mom taught me piano when I was 3, and then I started playing guitar and classical flute, and I just love music. And probably about 20 years ago, I started going to drum circles. I loved going. There was a time I didn't even have a drum. I would just go and play rattles or whatever. But there was something about drumming that just really moved me. And I would feel
Yeah.
so good afterwards. And then this is when I was living in Los Angeles. There were places, yoga studios and places, meditation centers where you could go and hear.
Right.
I started going because I had a really stressful job. Honestly, that's why I started going. I was so stressed out, burned out, and it made me feel so good. I'd leave there and it was like I didn't have a care in the world. It just
Yeah.
relaxed my whole anxiety body, if you
Yeah.
will.
If I could just interrupt you for a second for an
Yeah.
example, because I was just telling a person this the other day. Years ago, it was the first time I my first experience with sound. Something was going on in my life. I was struggling with something, and it was a Saturday. And I went to, it was just me and a friend and the person. And I think he had a gong. He had a gong. And when I left there an hour later, it was so amazing how my problem and me were separate. For
Yes.
the whole
Wow.
rest of the day, I was just in a higher space. I was in a higher vibration. And yeah, I had that problem, but it was just like, oh, well, that problem's over there. It was just such a separate part of me. I wasn't identifying with it. And I thought that was so fascinating. That was my first experience.
That was your
Yeah.
first experience. That is
Yeah.
so powerful. You know, the gong, which I play and integrate into sound baths, which I'll talk about in a second. The gong is the most healing of all the instruments because it has a huge range of frequency, like the lowest notes below what the human ear can hear, and the highest notes in these overtones. And so here's the science. I'm really geeky about the science part, but this is fun science, not boring. So the reason why this works, there's a guy out of UCLA in Los Angeles who is doing research with doctors, medical professionals, and sonic scientists, including a sonic scientist that I have studied with, John Stewart Reed. And the other guy's name is James Jimzewski. And they have found that every cell in the body emits a sound, every type of sound of cell. So maybe the heart cells have one frequency range, other cells of the brain have a different frequency range. And the most fascinating part is they have learned that if a cell, they look at them under a microscope while sound is being applied, sound frequency, if a cell is dead or lethargic and otherwise just not doing its job, when they apply that frequency to it, like let's say the note would be E on the range of
Mhm.
notes, that is what reinvigorates the cell to go back into doing its job. Okay, they looked at blood cells, dead blood cells, and applied a certain frequency to it, and they come back to being active cells. So
Wow.
this is extraordinary for the future of sound healing. I mean, this is
Yeah.
the why it works. This is the why it makes us feel good. I did a sound bath and I incorporate crystal bowls, Tibetan brass bowls, Native American flutes, the drum, zephyr chimes, the gong, lots of different things. One on one is the work that I do, and it's based on a person's issues. So, a person came to me and she's a fellow healer, and she was having terrible foot pain. She was racing around and getting ready for a sound bath client to come, and she slammed her foot into a door and broke it. And she was in terrible pain weeks later. And so we did the sound bath, and just by using the gong, I believe, and the drums for grounding, she said she never had that pain again. I mean, she still had some pain, but it made that
It
terrible pain.
subsided.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
so we ask, well, why could that happen? Well, if you are using a certain immersion of a certain frequency or frequencies that make those cells, let's even just imagine that it was only the blood cells, right? When blood cells are doing their jobs, they're taking oxygen to damaged areas of our body.
Mhm.
And that helps accelerate the healing process. So there really is a science behind it. And our bodies are like 70%, 65, 70% water. Water is 4 times as conductive as air. And so
Mm.
that really resonates within our bodies, the sound waves.
Mhm.
And they say that more
Wow.
than 4 or 5 minutes of sound is is actually what we need to come into entrainment, which is just a fancy word for the cells in our bodies to
Yeah.
come into alignment with the frequencies of whatever
Yeah.
the sound frequency is
I'll put
beautiful.
on it if I'm running, around, if I just have a lot going on and I don't have time to really be still, I
Yeah.
might be in the car and will put on some kind of sound healing. I'll actually thank God like maybe 15 minutes later because it's such a difference. Like I
Yes.
might feel anxiety and then 15 minutes later I'm in such a different space that I actually just say thank you because
Yes.
it's so amazing.
I was practicing sound healing, doing sound baths. I got, my Reiki certification. I'm a Reiki master. I was doing all those things. But then when the disc ruptured, I was like, okay, this is what you do. Like, start doing it for yourself.
Practicing
And
what you preach.
exactly. So I
Yeah.
was able to do the Reiki really easily flat on my back in bed. But then when it came time to do the instruments, that was much harder. It didn't come until a little later on. But I started noticing gradual improvement. And I do attribute, sound healing and Reiki to part of how I healed from all of this. Because there was a time when a doctor, an orthopedic surgeon actually said, you might be like this for the rest of your life. And that was pretty depressing. I was like, no, I don't. And I really accelerated my practice. And
Yes.
I do believe, your question about God, it's like I do believe that everything in the universe is energy. I mean, we are energy beings. And it is like when we speak kind words to a plant and it lives, and unkind words to another plant and it dies. These are classroom things that the kids do. There is power to our words that we speak, our actions, our thoughts, all of it. And this was where I really, really drilled down in my practice of speaking to God and trying to live in that energy of God's source and feeling the connection that we all are a bit of God stuff, and that everyone, everything is part of creation. And we are all
Absolutely.
in that beautiful space of unconditional love for everything, right?
Yes. So do you in your personal relationship, do you communicate through words or through is it like in your mind or how do you express or feel a communication with God? And do you call God God or your higher power or
Yeah, I know that's
what?
such a good
Yeah.
question. I've never really thought of it that deeply before, but I would say I do two things. So I do in my gratitude practice and in the morning and in the evening and all through the day, I thank God. I have a communication where I say, I am so grateful for this opportunity. I'm grateful for my health, even though it's not perfect. I am grateful for this body. And, I go into the whole thing. And that's part of the conversation. But the conversation doesn't stop there. Like when I meditate, it isn't a spoken thing. It's a feeling surrounded
Yeah.
by source.
Mhm.
And so sometimes I use that word, and throughout the day as things happen, like I live in a forest on a mountain, it's a pretty enchanting place. And I will be just thinking to myself and my intuition, you know, a feather drops in front of me and it's like, that's a sign. It was Wayne Dyer who said, and I love this, if prayer is you talking to God, intuition is God talking to you. And I love that. Kind of
I
how
think
I
that is
see it.
very true. Did
Yeah.
you have, for lack of a better phrase, come to Jesus conversations when you were going through this trial with your back this last time? It's just you talking to God and, expressing how you felt?
All the stuff, all of it, all of it. I you
Yeah.
know, I had a real dark night of the soul, truly. I can remember pretty early on, maybe it was about when the 4 to 6 month range, when I knew it wasn't 3 months anymore, and then they started telling me, "Oh, it could be 3 years," and I was like, "Oh, no." And I had this moment like, I'm a really good person and I've worked with nonprofits my whole life trying to be of service to the world, and I try to just be kind and loving, and I beam radiate love to the world. It's like I'm walking my walk here. It's like, what happened? Why did you do this to me? I had that moment of, why is this happening to me? What did I do wrong? If this is Earth School, why am I being punished for this? What kind of lesson is this? Oh, yeah, I went right down the rabbit hole of that. It's like any loss, grief. It's like I went through all the phases. At first, it was a little bit of denial. And then it was like, I am so angry at God.
Yeah.
And you go through the, okay, well, I'm trying to live in forgiveness and be positive and all that stuff. And just deep grief. I mean, I went through deep grief for the life that I knew I would never have again. You go through all of that and you hit literally rock bottom, the dark night of the soul, and you feel completely forsaken. I did. It isn't the only time I've been through this, and talking with friends and stuff, everybody goes through something like this, but it is a challenge to get out of that deep dark hole. That's where reading inspiring people and reading what other people have gone through. I did try to read about other inspiring stories, by people who've gone through other bad stuff, many times worse than what I even went through. And you find little things to hold on to. You begin a different dialogue. Okay, when this happened, gratitude practice aside, I mean, my sister-in-law has always sent me for many years these wonderful daily journals that have like a pretty nice amount of space to write, and I've always used it for my daily gratitude practice, and I attach longer post-it notes where needed. And then this happened and I stopped. I don't know why. I just stopped.
That's the hard time. I mean, I know and understand so many things when I have the time, when I can be enmeshed in my spirituality and my spiritual practice. I have this open communication with God.
Yeah.
I'm getting the messages. I
Yes.
have all this awareness. And then when I'm going through the really, really seriously hard, difficult time, I have to remember those things that I knew when I wasn't going through any kind of internal conflict or external
Right.
conflict. We're human beings, and we have to remember that thing we knew sometimes. Yeah.
Absolutely. It is so easy to lose sight of that. And here I am, up until that time, I was meditating every day. I had a very robust spiritual practice. And that happened. And it was all about survival for me. And I had to ask myself at some point in it, where did your spirituality go? This is when you need it. Like, I had to remind myself to get back. It's like any kind of a practice. It's like taking daily supplements. Some disruption happens and you get away from it and you have to remind yourself, oh, yeah, I got to get back to that. Same thing can happen with spirituality.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I just think that your story is so amazing. And just the fact that you were in the bed for 3 years, somebody else could be going through the same thing and not make the choice to fight and
Yeah.
decline. And that happened to many people during the pandemic. This was before the pandemic. And the fact that you had that in you and you fought for yourself and your spirit and you called on the things that and you were able to come through this. And I know you've been going through some aspect of it your whole life, but I just feel like some of it was meant to happen at this particular time. Do you
Oh,
feel like that?
absolutely, Adrian. I think that I've always sort of believed that everything happens at the right time. Everything happens in divine timing, right? And so when this happened, at first it was like, oh, this is messing up my life. Everything, it's like I was supposed to be doing this and that, and it's all messed up now. And that's what I was supposed to be doing. And it's like, oh, wait, no. It was sort of a test. I believe it was like a spiritual test. It's like,
Wow.
okay, you have been practicing all of this. And it's easy to practice when things are going well. When things start going downhill or hit rock bottom, it's like, are you still practicing? So I had a lot of time, obviously, in my journal to contemplate all of this stuff. And I would ask myself in my journal, well, if you believe that everything happens at the right time, you have to believe that this happened for a reason and it happened at this time for a reason. You accept that, Kathy? It was a place for contemplation of the bigger ideas that were so rooted in my life. And you have to say, well, wait, where are the roots of that?
This is such a treat. Thank you so much.
I love our conversation. That was just beautiful.
Oh,
Thank you,
me
Adrian.
too. Thank you for joining us. You can contact Kathy through her website, which is titled Surviving to Thriving. That's surviving, T-O, thriving.com. So you can find out more about her through her website, and you can contact her through her website. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, Let's Start Healing, and like this episode. Until next time, let's start healing.